Breaking news commencing. Please welcome the Oscar-nominated director and writer, Guillermo Del Toro.
Thank you. Over the years, the marriage of video games and movies has been frankly full of domestic violence and freaky children. Because of the stubbornness of an industry, the movie industry, that doesn't allow to conceive a video game as anything other than ancillary product.
On December 11th, 2010, film director Guillermo Del Toro took the stage after a tease of Batman Arkham City and a bunch of God of War 3 jokes from Dane Cook to make a big announcement.
So I couldn't think of a better place to tell you that I'm making my own game with an incredible team, and we promise you to bring you visually stunning worlds, one-of-a-kind characters, and hopefully you'll in your pants. So get ready for an unprecedented cinematic descent into madness. Let me give you just a tiny little taste of the craziness.
On this special edition of the Game Informer Show podcast, we're telling the untold story of Guillermo Del Toro's Insane. Hello?
Are you? Is it Ben?
Yeah, whoever that is, you're coming in super faint.
I'm Jacques.
Hey, Jacques, how's it going, man? Are you near a mic?
Hey, Ben, can you hear us okay?
I don't see anybody's camera. Does everybody have their cameras turned on here?
Yeah, we did a camera test on ours.
That's
Yeah.
Keystone Cops, I'm telling you.
Oh, it's amazing that this game never came out with this brain trust on the side of the
Yeah.
On this episode, we have Insane's art director Matt Flegel, lead writer Steve Jarras from Saints Row fame, who's now at Valve, and senior producer / creative director for Insane, Jacques Henouquet. Jacques, Steve, and Matt, welcome to the Game Informer Show, guys.
Hey.
Hello.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
How long have you guys known each other? When did you guys start working with each other?
Oh, man.
I was probably a Volition the longest.
Yeah.
And you, Jacques, you came in around 03. Yeah, that's what I would have said.
I started Volition at 04, so it's been like 14 years known Jack.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so Matt, you're the oldest there. You worked on like Free Space 2, is that right?
That's right. Yeah, I started in 1998.
I'm sorry.
Jacques, what are you doing?
The camera went in the opposite direction. Started in 98. He worked on Free Space 2.
Yeah, this is very exciting. See, even though the camera's all over the place and it looks like a Cloverfield film, you're still listening to everything that he's saying, which is pretty
Insane!
All right, let's get right to the meat of this thing. What's your guys' history on the Insane project? Give me like day one, first meeting, first inkling in the Volition office that this thing is happening.
So from my perspective, and I think Jacques might have a different one, I remember we were working on Saints Row 3, and we were talking about what was going to be next, and we were looking at what we could go and do. And so we knew we wanted to do like an action RPG was one of the things that we were talking about.
Yeah.
And so we were looking at it, but we also talked about wanting to go and do a licensed game. And so for a while it was like, oh, we could go and do... we investigated getting the Rift's license, and then they were crazy. And then another guy's like, oh, we should get Altered Carbon. And then we said, oh, no, we can do like a Dark Heresy thing, like a Warhammer 40k open world game. That'd be super dope. And we were all really excited about it. We were talking about some cool things we could go and do, like Eisenhorn stuff. And then Danny Bilson at THQ was like, hey, so I know you're excited about Warhammer 40k, but what if we made a game with Guillermo Del Toro? And I was like, holy shit, that's amazing. Can I come? And they hang out with you guys, and that was, and Danny pulled Jacques and Matt into a room, and he showed like this cocktail napkin. That was a sketch that Guillermo did in Danny's office, like I first did like original vision for what the game was.
The whole progress from the beginning of the game all the way through.
On one
And
napkin?
That was my.
It was a piece of paper, but 8.5 by 11, and I wish I would have brought it, but it's still packed up in a box, and I have no idea where that box is right now.
But that's my recollection. I mean, Jacques, does that sound about right, or is there something?
Yeah, I would have probably, I mean, in terms of like outside people, I think I probably would start at the first meeting we had with Mr. Del Toro. I'm going to call him that because I hate people who say Guillermo, when they don't necessarily know. We know him pretty well, and we call him Guillermo, but the first meeting was at Comic-Con, right, with Danny, and we met Guillermo that day, if my recollection is right. Right,
Remember,
Steve? Yeah, the two of them, Steve and Matt and I, came in to meet Guillermo, and it was hilarious because I think he could have scraped the jaws of the three of us from the sidewalk, when we met him. We were big fans. We liked him as a filmmaker. He was already pretty famous, right? I mean, I love, Pan's Labyrinth, and I love particularly The Devil's Backbone. That's my favorite film of his. And both Steve and Matt were really excited, and we met him. And the first thing he said do you guys remember the first thing he said to us?
I don't. I was basking.
You don't remember?
I don't.
I don't.
He said, if I don't hear a brilliant idea within the next minute, I'm wasting my time.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
And we all looked at each
that.
other, and I exploded into laughter, and I said, should we leave now, or do we talk at all? And then he laughed. He said, I was just yanking your chain. Let's start talking.
Do you remember what year this is? So it's Comic-Con, is it 2010, or do you remember the year?
Comic-Con 2010. And it was funny because I remember after the meeting, we bumped into Ron Perlman in the hallway, and that was a very strange. Well, I guess they all travel in packs. It was a wacky moment.
And we were really Star Trek. Let's be honest, right? I mean, I think
sure.
We were totally like, oh my God, it's Guillermo Del Toro.
And the joke about it too is that like the as the project went on, we had multiple meetings with them, and so like by the end of it, you're in a meeting and you're trying to break story and you're talking to him as a person, right? But then every time that another person meets him, it's like, oh, I can't believe that so and so's acting so starstruck. Like, no, we totally were. You know what I mean? Like the first time I met him, like, oh my God, it's blah. And then it's really easy to act all cool, after a while. But the first time you meet him, it's super exciting.
So was Danny Bilson hanging out in those meetings too? Was he pretty involved in the early stages?
Absolutely. Danny was. I don't know if you've reached out to him for this story yet. He'd be a great guy to go and talk to.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah. I think that last time I talked to him, I definitely would recommend talking to him because he started that idea before we got involved. Really, he and Guillermo got together and said, why don't we make a game? Right. And then they came to us.
So just backing up a little bit here, what was the attraction towards doing a licensed project? Those just seem like a huge pain in the ass. Was it just studio security, or what was the idea?
The idea at the time was that for doing something because I wanted to go and do a role playing game sort of thing. So it was a gap in the portfolio. So they wanted, and so it was if we use a licensed IP, there's kind of a pre-built world that we can just go and dive in and explore more, rather than having to go through the work of having to build something. But ultimately that all went away the moment that we had the opportunity to go and work with Guillermo on Insane. So let's make something new and shiny, you know what I mean? So it's not like Insane wasn't a game delving into the works of Guillermo Del Toro. It was very much its own story, its own entity. But before that, I was we want to make an RPG, and it would be cool to what can we go and do? And
outside of Summoner 3, yeah.
Outside of what? I'm sorry.
Outside of a Summoner 3.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what was in that first meeting? What did you guys actually discuss? What were the first ideas put out there?
It was interesting because
I remember being a little all over the map, just sort of
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And we didn't really. Go ahead, Steve.
Oh, I was gonna say, I think the thing is the meetings were all very brainstorming, just talking about things. He had that piece of paper where he's this is kind of some images that I had in my mind. He was really invested in mandalas and things like that, and so there's these sort of shapes and mysticism and things that were interesting to him, and then we kind of just riffed on those for a while. The thing that Guillermo said, it wasn't in that first meeting, but it was certainly in our second meeting when he was we still need to talk about. I don't have all the answers, but if you ever if no one makes a decision, I will. You know what I mean? If he's asked me to go and come up with an answer for something, I'll just go and say one. Yeah. So a lot of times it's us trying to go and talk and find. You don't want to go to that point because then people are pulling answers out of their hat, right? Yeah. So it's let's go and talk things through and try to go and develop something. That was exciting. And then we had a series of meetings developing the plot and what the story was going to go and be, and that was happening concurrently while he was developing different film projects and stuff like that. So he was always bouncing around between things.
Yeah, and actually there were two artists that were associated to the project. Two of his go-to guys, Francisco Ruiz and Guy Davis. And I worked with them quite a bit. And there were times when I would be on a Skype call with them talking about the work that they're doing for Insane, and Guillermo would come in and be like, we got to go over here and talk about this, and the meeting would get canceled because he was running I think 3 projects at the time, or 2 projects at least.
As a sort of summary of the initial period, I would say that our first meeting was really, in my opinion, finding out for Danny whether Guillermo and us were compatible, whether we could work with him and whether he got a good feeling or not. And if it didn't work out, we would have been out in a second.
Right.
And so apparently he liked us well enough that we had a series of meetings, and as Steve said, we developed what I would call the narrative over a bunch of brainstorming sessions in which Steve, but also Matt, Danny, his partner Paul DiMeo, Panchito, which is Francisco, forgive me, Francisco, if I call you Francisco, that was his nickname. Guy Davis and I were pretty much always involved. And he had, Guillermo, in my opinion, a number of very specific ideas, but he didn't have a sort of coherent narrative. So that's the first thing we developed together.
But beyond even the genre, did you have the genre locked down?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
He knew exactly what type of movie he wanted to make. Game, and the period where it took place. But he didn't, and he had elements of the story, but he didn't have, it was not woven into a coherent narrative or a coherent game.
So what was the game? What was out there?
What was out there? You mean before we worked together, or
no? I mean,
what?
what were you stitching together? What was the time period? What was the genre? What is this thing?
It was kind of like a 1920s eldritch horror sort of thing. You were a constable of a small town where things go wrong.
Oh, so was it third-person action game? Was it in the spirit of Volition's wheelhouse?
First person.
First person, really interesting. Was that a challenge for you guys, or I guess just going back to the Red Faction days, huh?
It turned out to be a challenge, but we can talk about that a little later. But it turned out to be a real serious challenge, actually. Probably one of the things that I think slowed the game down. I don't think that's what led to the game's cancellation, but it certainly, when we get to that part of the story, so to speak, I can tell you exactly what I think of that.
Okay.
But Steve was telling you that the play sticks game in a small coastal town, I think it's New England or Maine, or, it was the East Coast, definitely. I thought it was at the end of the 19th century, but essentially, then you can take it from there, Steve.
The gag is that you are you're the sheriff of this town that where after the celestial event you are separated from your son, and you're trying to go and find him and get him to safety and try to get with your wife, and just make sure everything's okay. But there's a lot of cues taken from The Thing and Cthulhu mythos. So So who do you trust, and what what can be trust? What is real? What is someone manipulating your mind? And lots of body horror. And just this, and then your adventure would take you. You woke up in this strange lighthouse, and then from there you would go on this adventure that would spawn from back in the day, insane asylums were aesthetically pretty, right? Because you didn't want to send a loved one to a crazy, a scary place, right? Because the mineral baths, and it's and so this idea of you go and explore this ostensibly kind of charming looking place is actually rather ugly. It's these kind of weird, again, a lovely exterior with this kind of weird underbelly beneath it, and then it weird shit like glue factory and monsters in mountains and just a bunch of a lot of really really cool set piece monster moments and psychological horror. I know it was a good mix of those. It was basically you'd have one cool set piece moment, and then everything would get really shrunken down and really focus on some more intimate psychological horror, and then boom, crazy monster moment.
Yeah, I know. Oh, go ahead,
One
Jack.
thing I'd like to add to frame that, right, is Steve alluded to it, but essentially that town is under attack. It's an alien invasion, and it's progressive. At first, you barely notice it, but gradually the presence becomes more and more emphatic, and then you really discover what is behind that invasion, and it becomes absolutely stupefyingly monstrous, you know? So they have a range of monsters or creatures that go from pretty small at the beginning to enormous, the size of mountains at the end.
It just
Some
Lovecraftian stuff.
And your goal is to, reunite your family, but also defeat that invasion, right? So I think it's important to mention that.
It starts off at like a real small county fair where you're trying to go and you be with your family, and then some weird stuff happens, but you know what I mean? It's more, it's nice.
There's an eclipse of the sun. I think we can say that.
Yeah. But then the the final one of the ideas for near the final end, that's where it starts.
Do it.
And where it ends is is a giant creature, and your plan to go and you have to go and try to kill this thing. So your plan ends up being you go and you literally drive a fucking train into him, right? You try to go and launch and impale this guy with a fucking train.
Loaded with dynamite.
You load it with a bunch of chemicals from a glue factory, and you drive this thing, you hop the rail, impale the creature, and then you have a level inside the body of the beast, and this is M.C. Escher, non-Euclidean geometry hellscape inside an eldritch horror while you try to blow it up, and as you're inside this hell train inside a body. That was our grand finale. So
there are a couple of pretty incredible moments dispersed through the thing.
This sounds like an impossible game to make, you guys.
No, I don't think so. I
Really?
think it was totally possible to make it.
It feels, I know in interviews, Del Toro referenced BioShock. Is it too easy of a template to say hey, this was Volition's attempt at a BioShock style game?
The scale was very different, I think, to me, right? There's very different scale and very different atmosphere in a way. To me, BioShock is fairly intimate.
Yeah.
This is not intimate. It goes back and forth between very personal and massive.
Right. But, I mean, still, were you shooting going through this thing primarily then?
You were doing a bunch of things.
Well, I think that's part of and again, it's easy to talk about some of these crazy set piece moments that we talked about, but the reality is that we never necessarily got to go and see them made flesh because we're trying to, for instance, one of the things with eldritch horror, right, is tentacles is a part of eldritch horror, right? Multi-limbed animals or multi-limbed creatures is a part of eldritch horror, and it's we didn't have. I mean, we had to develop an engine that would go and support that, or if you have tentacles, you're going to want to cut off tentacles, right? And so it's there's a lot of infrastructure that has to be built before we could actually go and make the game. And I don't think that we ever really, and again, we were making third-person games for a very long time. It's been a long time since we made a first-person game, and the engine that we currently had for third-person wasn't necessarily playing nice with first-person. And so there's just a lot of stuff that you're reinventing the wheel and trying to get your feet back. So even though we had badass pieces of concept art, we had cool set pieces that we knew we wanted to go and do, but you still had to go and make the game, and there's a lot of time that it would take to go and get it together, know?
Yeah. And from my perspective, I think where we hit two major problems. One was what Steve described, which was the existing engine was not prepared to do what we needed it to do. Tentacled opponents, multi-tentacled opponents was a real challenge. And we struggled pretty hard with melee combat in first person. I would say that was one of the big stumbling blocks of the game. And it was frustrating for us, the three of us, and other people on the team. But it's hard. It's very hard to do good, first person melee combat as it is. But with a multi-tentacle monster, it's really hard. So that was number one, right? I think on the other side, we had developed, in my opinion, a strong narrative. We had our pillars for the game, what we wanted the game to be. We had a really good look. Matt and his teams and, Francisco and Guy had developed some very compelling stuff. We also had some really cool ideas for special effects that were going to be pretty unique. Right?
That's good.
What is that?
Well, You know, those do you watch any of like the Bungie Dev Diary
Yeah.
stuff? You know the guy who does the special effects video sound effects, and it's like it's gonna be like pew pew,
Right,
you know
right.
that guy. Yeah, that was the guy doing our effects. That was Dave. Yeah, Dave Samuel.
Dave Samuel.
He's and he's just a fucking stud of an effects artist, and like he has had some really like what if I can do some crazy stuff? Let's do some crazy things. And it's like, oh my god, that's really
cool.
really sexy. Like that's cool.
And the small history of it is, correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but I think Dave left Volition to go to Bungie in great part because Insane was canceled and he didn't get to work on the project anymore. He really loved the project.
I don't want to speak for him, but I would imagine that's a component of it. Yeah.
Well, he told me that, so that's why I'm
Oh, okay. Well, then you can speak.
But he might also not have said, "I'm leaving because I hate your guts and you're on the project and I don't want to sign it."
Yeah, it was all my fault.
So how big was the Insane team at this point? Because you guys were also in peak development for Saints Row 4?
No, this was before Saints Row 4.
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
it was basically the team was gonna. I mean, it actually got. I think it probably got too large too soon.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, except that, with what we had, I think we had developed viable components in other areas of the systems of the game, like movement, camera, were okay. They were not finalized, but they were okay. Combat was where we really struggled. So did we have too many people in certain areas? Maybe. In some areas, we probably didn't have enough, or maybe, I hate to say that, but maybe not the right people. But that's where we were hurting. And then, there was the fact that and that is why we ended up taking the project to Montreal, is that I was very concerned about our ability to ramp up and build up the team to full production, given the fact that there were other projects going on at Volition. I didn't think we could hire enough high-quality people fast enough to make that game at Volition anymore. Because we had gotten a little bit burned. The three of us worked on another different original IP project, and we thought it was really good, and we couldn't staff it just because the other projects, took longer than expected or just were going on. So I was a little nervous already about staffing up, and it got worse and worse as the project went on, and that's why we ended up taking it to Montreal, and then essentially Danny Bilson was replaced by Jason Rubin, and Jason Rubin canceled the project in great part because he felt like THQ's finances could not bear the development costs.
Right. Okay, so when you say moving development to Montreal, is that just a completely different studio, or are you sharing development between Volition and Montreal?
No. Basically, he asked me to go there, and initially he said, you can take up to half of your team with you if the people are willing to go.
This is Bilson talking to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then they realized how expensive it was going to be to do that, and I ended up being able to take 5. And I, of course, asked Matt and Steve whether they'd be willing to go, and they couldn't for different reasons, and didn't want to and couldn't. They had kids, established family lives. I don't have children. It was easier for me. But it was a big reason why the project left. It was the only reason why it left. Danny and I was convinced we couldn't staff it. Danny agreed. And THQ had opened a new studio in Montreal called THQ Montreal, where Patrice Desilets was working on a game.
Yeah.
And they wanted another high-profile title there to really launch the studio, and that was going to be it. So that's why we left with a few people. And those two guys, couldn't join us, and I felt really awful, but I felt even worse when it got canceled, and the few people I dragged out there were in Montreal, which is a very nice city, but and it happened pretty quickly after we moved.
Man.
Ruben I think replaced Danny in the summer of 12. And he came to see me almost right away and said, I'm going to have to nuke this, and I was like, awesome, and so that's the sort of tail end of what happened. And I think that's the main reason it got canceled. I don't think it got canceled because we couldn't solve the game. It got canceled because that double punch of like moving people to Montreal and then basically not having the money to make the game anymore.
So the idea was Patrice's studio was going to release this before
No,
your
no.
project?
Patrice was working on 1666.
Right.
Different game, right? And so we were going to be the other big game at the studio.
Okay,
Yeah.
but still the same.
The closest thing was this, like you basically had two games at Montreal that were very high production value, high profile, you know what I mean, asset intensive products, right? And so they're trying to go and get those both going. You have to go and staff up a bunch of people, have to onboard a bunch of high level talent and try to roll it in there. And it was just like, we don't know, we can't go and support having those two things going.
God.
And that was my understanding from my end, but
They just didn't have the money, and in the end, 1666 got canceled too because THQ went belly up, so everything got canceled, But that took another 7 to 8 months. But Insane was canceled before that because he couldn't see funding the game. He just flat out said, we don't have the muscle to do this anymore. And my hope was that even if they didn't move, Steve and Matt and maybe Alan, although I'm not sure he even was, but there were a few other people that would have loved to see continue to collaborate on the game, even if we were in Montreal and they were, at Volition. But it all went out in smoke.
Yeah.
What it was
How did you communicate that with Del Toro? It's such a complicated thing, a complicated spot in the video game industry, like that tail end of THQ being split across multiple studios. What was that communication like?
I didn't. Danny did, and that's when Guillermo. I emailed him and I said, I'm really sorry, and that's when he bought the game, and he essentially bought the game for what was going to be his payment for working on the game.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And Guillermo said at the time, don't despair, we're going to make this game anyway, and it just didn't pan out, right? And then he was full on into Pac Rim and then other films after that, and it just didn't happen.
Yeah, well, I know that in interviews, Del Toro said that, boy, I still want to make this game, and I'm hoping Valve will make it someday.
Yeah, well, there you go. Steve is still there. He can do it.
There we go.
I think the game could have been very, very good. I think it still needed a lot of work, and it's a difficult game, but I think it could have been really compelling and pretty amazing. Yeah. So it was a big disappointment for me.
Yeah, I'd imagine. Steve, did you ever hear a whisper of that within the halls once you got there?
Oh, Valve?
Yeah.
Not well. I can't talk about what I hear about.
All right.
Let's talk about Insane. I had not heard about Insane in particular coming through. I do know that I think Guillermo has been here before to talk about collaborating with Valve. But I know that lately, he's been working with Kojima-san, right? So I imagine that's...
I thought that was over.
Oh, is it? Oh,
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Well, it exists in the sense of Death Stranding. Del Toro's a character in it, but obviously Silent Hills was the next big project that also got canceled. So I know he had a tough double whammy there of Insane and Silent Hills both going down.
Is he not involved in Death Stranding?
He is. He's in it. I don't know how much he's getting in there and tinkering with stuff, but he's certainly an actor in it, which is strange.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. Did you guys?
I know that Guillermo's before said that his goal was to go and do something in every form of entertainment. I think that was an itch that he always wanted to get scratched. And
he likes games. He's a gamer and he likes games.
Oh yeah, totally.
What did you have any? What was the most challenging part about working with Del Toro? Was it just scheduling, or was it him coming in with more of a Hollywood mindset and you having to reframe, like, here's how it works in games. Here's what you're not understanding about game development.
I can speak to some art examples of that. Some of the and challenges isn't quite the right word, but I know, as I said, I had weekly meetings with his concept guys, and they handled a lot of the creatures and production design, paintings and mood and tone, and we had some of our concept artists doing characters and locations and that sort of thing. And so sometimes I would be in a situation where the week prior I would say, okay, here are the things that we want to focus on from the narrative or whatever. And then we would come back and then we would get concepts that were like sort of in that vein, but maybe nudged a little bit over, in a slightly different direction. And it's like, oh, Guillermo and I were talking, and this is, he kind of wanted to go this way with it. And I was like, okay, well, now I got to go back and talk to what's happening to the level that is being roughed in right now about what this looks like. And we, so it wasn't, it was, I don't know, slight stumbles, I guess, in that sense, like sometimes not being totally aligned to like, here's what the production process is, and now these concepts are coming in, and we gotta, pivot and shift.
I think that the thing about like the idea of like Hollywood mindset, I think it's the wrong phrase, because to Jacques' point, he really does love games and wanted to make a really good game. I think where the problem happened sometimes was that we were really excited to be collaborating with Guillermo, and so sometimes you'd be talking about ideas, oh yeah, that sounds fucking awesome. You start brainstorming off of it, but because you get so excited and you get caught up in that moment, sometimes you go, oh, like obviously in any case situation when we go and be like, yeah, technically this isn't going to work as well in a game, he'd go, oh yeah, okay, great, let's try. I mean, like he was always open to adapting to it, but I believe that there are probably more instances where we probably could have done that more than we did. But whenever we did that, he was always receptive to it. I just think that we were really excited. We wanted to make the best game possible too, because like this is going to be really hard, but if we could pull this off, holy shit, it's going to be cool, right? Yeah. And so I think that it's not like he was a joy to work with. You know what I mean? It's not that. I think it's more that sometimes your eyes get bigger than your stomach, because you really want it. Like it's going to be hard, but if we can pull it off, it's going to be amazing. And then the problem, unfortunately, is that when you make draw and you don't have the money to go and keep on taking. I mean, developing some of those ambitious ideas takes time, right? It takes time, it takes money, and if you're out of time and money, you can't do them anymore. And so it's easy to be like, oh, if we had pared back X, Y, or Z, we could have had something, but then it also wouldn't have been the game that we were excited to go and make. And you know what I mean? It's like a chicken egg thing.
Right.
A few things that I'd like to add to that is, to me, there were three things. I agree with both Steve and Matt, but I'd like to add a couple of things. The first one is definitely Guillermo I was amazed at how collaborative he was, because, Hollywood directors are gods. You work on a film shoot, you're the director, you say what you want, people just do it, right? Game development is not quite like that. It's a much more collaborative medium. And so he was really, to me, impressive in terms of how willing he was to work with us. However, he's still a filmmaker. So when he had ideas, most of the time, I think he was thinking in terms of scenes or even shots. So he had a great idea for something that would look awesome, but what we had to explain to him often, aside from the complexities, was the fact that if you just looked away at the time this happened, you would miss the entire thing, right? That's the difference between a film and a game. And so we had to remind him sometimes of that, even if he's a gamer, right?
Yeah.
But he was a good sport about it. And I think the other thing that surprised him is how slow, relatively speaking, the rhythm of game development is compared to a film shoot. I think he thought once we have the script worked out and we have the concept, it's going to be like, 6 weeks or maybe a little more. And he didn't realize how painfully slow and how much trial and error there is in developing, the game side of a game, right? The systems.
Particularly when you're developing the engine for it too, right?
That's right.
I mean, it's not like we had a thing that was ready made. Like if hypothetically speaking, Insane was an open world game, we could have had a lot more to show them really right off the bat. But it's like, oh, it's a first person melee combat game. We're gonna need a minute, Like that's
I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah.
And so I think, honestly, if you ask him, I think he was disappointed by that. I think he viewed it as a failure of ours or mine to not make things move faster. And I felt like it was a failure on my part to some extent, maybe not to the same extent that he might have. But I felt like, for example, we should have been able to solve that combat sooner, or at least we should have been able to come up with an approach to it that was encouraging and promising, which we didn't do till the very end. But, and then he, from a visual standpoint, I think he enjoyed working with us, or a narrative standpoint. But I think he felt like he had the idea for the game, and then he is a very visual director. I mean, his strength is visuals, right? He is all about colors and art direction, right? So he felt like, well, you're not exactly teaching me anything in that area, right? So I think in the end, he probably felt like my contribution in all this was substantial, and you guys didn't really deliver on your end. And he never said that to me, I'm guessing, but I think it's probably what he thought, and I feel kind of bad about it. Some of it was justified, some of it was not. Some of it was just him not probably realizing what game development is like.
Right. And so at some point, I think you also mentioned that it was a trilogy, maybe when it was announced.
It was going to be a trilogy. Yeah.
Is that right?
And I think, Steve, that's what you were thinking of. The second one was supposed to be in San Francisco in the 20s.
Yeah.
Oh,
right?
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. Because it's a sort. The game was sort of a loop, right? 20 San Francisco was the second game, and I don't remember when the third one was supposed to take place. Do you? Do you guys remember?
I don't. For the sake of a good story, let's just say a space station.
Right.
Oh, dude, that sounds fucking dope.
But the other thing,
That's right.
the other thing we didn't mention was, how much. Well, you should have, Steve, because you share his passion, right? You mentioned Cthulhu, but he is a big fan. Guillermo Del Toro is a huge fan. He wears that. What's the name of the university, Steve?
Miskatonic.
Yeah, he wears a Miskatonic University ring. I mean, the guy is serious about. And so the flavor was very much going to be that.
Yeah.
Right?
What do you? Oh, go ahead, Jack.
No, please.
I was going to say, what do you guys remember about the VGA reveal? 2010 VGAs and a very, very cryptic trailer. What was your involvement there?
We were actually that was like a thing that THQ put together separately. It was based on a moment that was supposed to be in the game. So like there was a reason why there was a shot with someone with a needle to their eye. That was a deliberate moment. That was from the game.
And we were not.
We weren't told about it. I was as surprised to see it as anybody else.
Yeah, we were also. I mean, full disclosure as much as we can. I think the three of us were not particularly enamored of the title, Insane, and the font treatment. We thought it was not really in keeping with the overall tone and flavor of the film. But that is something that was not really discussed with us much.
Well, that was the thing, is that we had Insane as like kind of like the working title. And the thought in turn, this is my recollection of it, and I could be wrong, so please correct me if I'm wrong, Jacques or Matt. But I was like, okay, this is the working title, but you know what I mean? Like titles always change at the end.
We'll figure something else out.
Or not. Yeah. Or we guess the name of the game is Insane, and that's what the game is going to be called. Like, that could happen too. And so it was. It was a bit of a
surprise.
So is that just based on it started in an insane asylum, or it touched on an insane asylum then?
It uses. It uses
it.
I mean, part of it takes place in an insane asylum.
Okay.
Yeah, it did take place in an insane asylum. It was more like that was the setting of it. And
as a theme, insanity played into it. I think it's better to look at it that way.
The game is very much about, are you sane or insane? Have you gone insane or are you still sane?
Okay. All right. And there's little tests along the way. And maybe
big tests.
A big test. What does that mean?
Not real tests.
Yeah. The game had core pillars, right? And so these are tenets that were like these are the things that are kind of directing our decisions. And one of the three pillars was literally called mindfuck, and that was one of the pillars of the game was mindfuck. And each of the things had a corresponding image. So like one's like visceral combat, it might be a picture of a guy holding an axe or whatever, then like otherworldly adventure, and so you have different stuff. And then we had mindfuck, and the image for mindfuck, it was pretty good. And so there was a lot of tough choices that was exciting. There was exciting stuff that I think were cool, challenging moments, but like there were arguments on the team at certain points about like, can we go, like, do we want to go and depict this moment?
Right.
Can we go and depict this moment in a tasteful way? Do we not? You know what I mean? Like there's lots of I don't even want to say controversial, but it's just more like.
Oh, it was definitely controversial. Some gruesome things.
That we were thinking about doing, and the player's agency in those moments were interesting, because that's a big part of the genre. You know what I mean? Like that's a part of that sort of eldritch horror element is, you know what I mean?
It was a horror game. I mean,
exactly. And part of it is also like, again, not only do you see like, grotesque monstrosities, but it's also like there's all the like, you know, ritual and, you know what I mean, these things, and like, you know, there's lots of great horror moments come from like doing something that you really believe is the right thing to go and do, but to an outside observer it looks really, really,
despite how horrific,
it looks horrible,
appear,
and like, and then when you give yourself this unreliable moment, it's like, oh shit, like, am I killing a monster, or am I
killing a person?
Am I being? Am I? And that's where I think some of like the thing elements kind of come into it. Right. You know what I mean? Like, and that's where it gets. Only there's no blood test in a wire, right? Like it's just more like, are you the thing? Eat the axe. You know what I mean? Like, oh shit, you're dead now. I fucked up. I done made mistakes, right? And so like those sorts of moments.
And you know, I don't know if you've been familiar with Guy Davis's art.
It's like Pacific Rim concept art and stuff, right?
Yeah. He
was comics first. He worked on BPRD with Mike Mignola, which was sort of an offshoot of the Hellboy universe.
And he did Marquis de Sade, or the Marquis.
Yeah, the Marquis.
Yeah, that's right. He did some of his own pieces.
So, you know, this guy, he's phenomenally talented. So is Francisco, by the way. I think they're both great, you know.
I would agree with that completely. And they were awesome to work with.
Yeah, but Guy, when he comes up with creatures for Guillermo Del Toro, with stuff that, you know, I don't have much hair left, but whatever was left was standing straight up. And I'm not easily shocked. And there was stuff where I cringed. I mean, right?
Yeah. There are some.
I mean, the big fat lady with a whole.
Yeah. There's the thing. Well, and then the you know, there's the religious one.
Oh yeah.
Not only were they just amazing visualizations, but they were just like super creative and really out of the. You never knew what you were going to get with, which was always just like super inspiring, and it was just great to work with. I actually learned a lot about being an art director from just like listening to these guys talk, and how what their process was and how they came up with their ideas.
But his creativity, I think, Guy in particular, far less so Francisco, who to me is a color guy. He really is.
Oh yeah.
And a very good one. But Guy's creativity is definitely very disturbing, and he'd be the first one to admit it. I think.
Yeah.
He kind of smirks when you tell him that, and you can tell that it's like, well, yeah, that's kind of what I do.
So how exciting was this project compared to everything else within Volition? Because I mean, you guys are working on Saints Row 3 and 4, which are batshit in their own right, but did it feel like a very special project even within the halls of Volition there?
For me, it was scary. You know, like it was exciting, but it was scary. You know?
I agree. I agree.
You know, like it's cool, but like it's like this thing is. Like the feeling that I always got was like, this thing is either going to be like the coolest shit ever, or we are going to crash. You know what I mean? Because it's like you're putting these.
It's a lot riding on it.
Yeah, and it's just like, because again, these cool moments, like, oh my god, like this sounds incredible. And if we pull it off, it's going to be incredible. But then it's like, oh, what's the version if we don't pull it off? Like, what does this look like if it's clumsy? If it's not, you know what I mean?
Not
like,
good.
those are the things. Like, it could go really bad, you know. And so it was exciting, but it was scary, you know. And there's also this moment that comes when it's like, to Jacques' earlier point, I totally agree with him and his read of like, you know, progress not happening necessarily as fast, and you know what I mean, expectations. And it's like you go through these meetings, and it's like you could have a milestone where there's actual meaningful progress. That's like, this is really good for the engine, but it's like you can't show this to Guillermo because he's not going to care about how this engine got marginally. You know what I mean? Like, because this is improved now, we can go and have, you know what I mean, a six-legged creature move. You know what I mean? Like, we need to do that, but that's not sexy, right? That's not like, oh man, you know, you've been gone for 3 months. Here's you know what I mean? Like, here's a rough pass of a full level sequence. You know what I mean? Like the rough steps. And every time you get to one of those, it's like, oh shit, like I gotta go and tell Dad that you know what I mean? Like, it's coming along, but it's not as fast as he thinks it is. But you know, can't have a baby in under 9 months. And so you know what I mean? Like there's this like there's a certain amount of nerves that went with it. So it was cool.
On the other hand, wouldn't you say that? Wouldn't you agree that for example, in my opinion, you know, Steve and Matt and I all worked together on Saints Row, on the first Saints Row, right? So we started it from scratch. I mean, I don't think anytime you do something that's going to be remotely interesting, you're going to be a little scared and a little nervous. If you're not, it means you're not doing something that's really going to be that interesting. I think we were kind of scared when we did Saints Row 2. And to me, Insane was more challenging than Saints Row in different ways, right? But it was more challenging.
I would agree with that. Yeah,
Totally.
Yeah.
Because it was not, entirely in our control to start with. Assuming Saints Row was, but and we had that external element of Guillermo and his creative influence and his people and expectations that come with working with him, right?
And there's also a certain amount of studio ego as well.
Oh yeah,
right? Where it's you want to go improve that. Like, we can go and do more than just make a Saints Row game, right? Like, we can do other things. Like, yeah, we did this, but we can do other things too. We can do anything. You know what I mean? So. Yeah. You get this thing, and we can go and do it. This is hard, and that's a humbling moment, and then that gets scary too. And again, to Jacques' point, it's exciting, scared, but scary.
Well, I figured that, like as you said, right, if it was not going to go well, we would crash and burn. But the beauty of crashing and burning is you're dead, so you don't know anything. It's like, you might as well keep going until you do, right?
That's true, right?
The alternative being to stop in the middle of the bridge and say, I don't know about this. What do you think, Steve? Maybe we should turn back.
That's right. The only way out is through.
That's right. Right.
Just gotta keep moving.
I don't know. Maybe we should make it a puzzle game instead.
Guillermo Del Toro's MASH 3. Insane.
How'd you guys hear about the
most mind-bending MASH 3 game of all time?
How'd you guys hear about the cancellation? Was that a rough day? You want to walk me through how you each learned?
Well, at that point, GHQ's on fire. So at that point, it's like, oh man, I lost my Louis Vuitton luggage. Oh shit, this plane's going down. You know what I mean? Gotta what do you?
Not for me.
Scary for Jacques. Yeah, Jacques. Yeah. Jacques had he was on ground floor with that. So that's a tougher thing for him.
Well, for them, they basically were at a studio where you had other projects they could go work on. The few guys that had lured to Montreal, and then the people we had hired since we got there, well, because there was a number of people who were very interested in the game, and we staffed up pretty fast. But then, Ruben showed up, and it was all. And then he asked me and offered us to work on a different project, and we did, which is a totally different story, and I won't get into that. But it was basically not entirely unexpected because we knew, as Steve said, that THQ was on fire, right?
Yeah.
But it was still a very serious. I felt really bad towards the guys I had brought, Traff, guys like Traff, and those are people with family who, they uprooted from Champaign to come to Montreal and work on this project, and I felt a real responsibility towards those people. So honestly, I felt like shit, but you move on, right? It's as I said, that to me was the crash and burn. It was like the real one, because I still thought we could make that game, and if they had the money backbone to do it, it was, in my view, doable. It would have taken another 2.5 years to 3 years, but it was doable. And so we'll never know unless Guillermo does it. But even if he does it, we won't be, likelihood part of it, so we won't know.
Like, the thing that's kind of interesting, like when a project gets canceled that's so ambitious, apart from like the sadness that comes with it, is like, in a weird way, like you get a look at it with like, it would have been great. You know what I mean? Like you never have to go and actually like deal with the repercussions of you like shipping a product. Like, oh, that didn't work. It's like no, it would have been great because I never have to actually prove it. Right. And I think that there's a strange form of comfort in that. Like a certain level of burden is taken off of you. Yeah. But it's depressing because you have a dream. You spend. It's 2 years, right? It was literally 2 years of your life working towards something that you're really excited about. And to Jacques' point, people moved, right? They changed countries because they really believed in the project. And having that go away because of a fucking UDraw tablet is shitty, So like,
and some people left. I believe some people left Volition because the project was canceled. Dave Samuel being one of them, but I think there were more than one that left because the project was new, and they really wanted to work on it.
Yeah. What any other people you want to shout out from the team to just celebrate their hard work that'll never see the light of day?
Alan Lawrence at the beginning, I think he helped us a lot. But he's always been an amazing programmer, and you know, Dave Samuel, as I mentioned, I thought really contributed at a much higher level than we could expect or even hope for.
Susan did some really great work.
She did a very good job. She was working with Matt as an associate art director. She did a great job. Who else comes to your mind? Trav did it on the environment, doing a great job.
Tim Lawson.
Yeah, McLean.
I mean, there's a lot of good dudes. I feel like.
It would be everybody on the team, I would say.
Yeah.
Well, I'd qualify that. Sorry.
Okay.
No, sorry. I'm being honest. I think we had real issues with some, and I hate to. I'm not saying it's, I'm not blaming them, but the bottom line is that we had a real design issue that didn't get solved, right?
Let me clarify. On the art team.
Oh, okay. I'm talking about the whole team, right? And I'm not even saying they were not. They were good designers, but the bottom line is we had a problem to solve that was not getting solved for a long time, right? And that's not good when you're doing game development, right? We're not talking about a few weeks, right? I'm talking about a bunch of months.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing too. Is like at the end of the day, it's easy to go and be like we had no money, but like if Insane was close to shipping, right? Like they would have shipped it, right? If it was close, right? But it's like the reality is that it was making headway, but it was still like 2 years.
Yeah,
at
2 years
least,
out,
right? At least 2 years out, in my opinion.
Yeah,
at least.
So I mean,
that's a chunk of money.
Yeah. But I mean, for what it's worth, that does happen too. Like Red Faction Guerrilla took 5 years, so you know what I mean. It's not that
was a big,
it doesn't happen.
The heavy tech lift on that one, and I think we were sort of faced with the same things we've discussed with this going, first person and all of the engine stuff associated with it. But
it was the reverse for RFG, right? This was going open world and third person from first, really.
Yeah.
No, that's interesting. Yeah. Was the other canceled game you guys were hinting at? Was it Underground? Is that what that thief game was called?
No.
Revolution?
That's a different
Actually,
one.
I was on that.
Underground.
That was during my time.
Oh, there was a real sexy tech demo where they did play stuff down with Batman.
Yes.
And it was cool. Like, oh man, that'd be a dope Batman game. No, we had like it was like a futuristic kind of like Mission Impossible sort of Shadowrun without magic and elves. You know what I mean? Sort of stuff. It was set in Kuala Lumpur. It was cool. It was really. Yeah, that was a cool.
That's another one of those.
Yeah, ironically enough, its name was Downfall.
Yeah. And it was ours. It was ours.
But that baby is perfect because it's like the team size was like literally 5 people. I think it might have ballooned up to 7 at one point, and so it's just never.
But honestly, how many? Okay, so I have worked in games long enough that I have seen quite a few projects canceled. Right, it's never fun. But you don't always feel that way. You're right, Steve. It's always perfect because you never got to the hard parts, maybe. Yeah. But there are projects that were canceled, and I was like, I'm kind of glad it got canceled because
I've been there too. Yes.
and to me, Downfall and Insane were 2 games that I really would have liked to see made.
Yes.
I really would have liked to see them made.
And Downfall, what era was Downfall? What year was that?
That was
2 years.
That was what? 2006, 2008?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We couldn't staff it. Same problem because, there was SR2 and Red Faction Guerrilla, and the studio was basically completely focused on those 3 games.
Yeah.
And we couldn't so we had, as Steve said, 5-6 people, and we were supposed to ramp up at a given point. We were green 3 times. And then at some point they said to me, well, we're going to put it on ice. And I was like, don't bullshit me. You're canceling it. And we're like, no, we're not.
On ice. It's going to come back. I remember in the meeting, like, when has something that's been on ice ever been thawed? It's like, no.
I went back to those guys and I went back to them, to Steve and Matt. And I said, look, it's canceled, right? And we all moved on. But I really regret that. I had a lot of fun working on those 2 clowns with it. And I think it had a lot of funness and we same thing, solvable, ambitious game, but solvable.
Yeah. Are there any other big memories, like favorite days working on Insane you guys haven't mentioned yet? Memorable meetings, discussions?
My favorite memory was hands down where, we went to Bleak House, went to Guillermo Del Toro's place to go and break story, and that was the coolest thing in the world.
Oh, yeah.
That was incredible. Yeah. That was the best. So
did we go there once or a couple of times? I thought we went there. Did we go there a second time?
I don't remember.
I don't remember.
We did it all. It probably was twice, but that was just like a real. That moment was beyond cool. So that was hands down the
I wasn't cool enough to go to that. That was
us nerds were talking that story.
Right. Us artists were off doing art.
And I would say to me there was another moment which is a little special to me because I gave Guillermo Del Toro an old book that I had, which is an original edition of the Jules Verne book, engraved. And he loves Jules Verne. At the time he took us to Bleak House, he was working on the Nautilus, the submarine, a model, because he builds models. Anyway, when we were invited to Bleak House, he showed me that he had put the book in a display case, in Bleak House for people to see and look at. And that felt pretty good. I was happy because, that was my gift to him. I didn't buy it for him. I had it from my childhood. I just gave it to him. So that was a sort of combination with what Steve, mentioned, going to Bleak House. But that was special for me.
Yeah. Awesome.
And it was a wasted investment now I think of it.
Give that back.
I'm not going to ski mask. Just go into the house, he'll throw a brick through the window, come back. I'm taking the Nautilus's interest. Just runs out. Nautilus in one hand.
One thing we would all agree on is that this guy, Mr. Del Toro, was an amazing guy to work with. He's a really friendly, super intelligent, funny guy, and he's a pleasure to work with. Would you guys agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was great.
Hands down.
It was great.
Yeah,
it was amazing.
I think from the outside world, I think people assume okay, Hollywood talent. I'm sure he swung by the office twice, had a couple of Skype calls, but you guys backed it up that he was heavily involved in this thing?
It was far more I don't want to give the impression that he was there every day, you know what I mean? Like in the sugar mines. But it was far more involvement than I think anybody expected.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He was invested in the project. It wasn't again, not that he would be there every day. But the thing that's interesting is you don't know what it would have looked like if it got closer to production, right? Because a lot of stuff too is what is he going to go and do? We had a story. We have to go and get some of the stuff up on his feet to show him, Yeah. So who's to say? But I will say I was definitely surprised with how hands-on, as hands-on as he was, given other stories that you hear of people.
And it's not just how involved he was to me, but the way he was involved. It was always extremely encouraging, positive, fun. He took us on board to discuss things with him that many directors might not discuss with people.
Although I will say, one of the challenges though is because he has so many ideas. He can go and disappear for 2 months and come back and you're working this thing. Oh, I have a new idea. It's gonna be blah. And so that's hard, right? Because it's you want to go. Oh, it is a cool idea, so we're gonna try. But
we drowned a few of his puppies, right? I mean, we
did. We might have wanted to lower the pet population a little more. But by the same token, it's you also don't want to go and fall victim to sunk cost, right? You don't want to go and be part of the sunk cost. A better idea, just because you spend 2 months on something doesn't mean it's the right thing to spend your 2 months' time on, right? So it cuts both ways. Yeah. I just think that sometimes it was easy to be that sounds awesome, and I really want to find a way to make it work. And I think sometimes the desire, the heart was very willing, and sometimes we just didn't have the tools to go and actually do some of the stuff.
Yeah, right. And in all fairness, I think sometimes we got caught up in the mood and we one-up-men him on that stuff. I mean, we came up with our own ideas that were not necessarily entirely realistic.
That's fair.
If memory serves me right, we're not always, stepping on the brakes, quite the contrary sometimes. Because wasn't it your idea, Steve, to step on that wheel and then from there go to the other planet?
Oh God.
Yeah. Okay. Never mind. We can.
No. I'm trying to. I'm in. Oh God, yeah, there was a lot.
You opened up a big can of worms with that one.
Yeah.
And it was cool, right?
Yeah,
So,
the other one. I forgot. I kind of forgot.
Climbing on the celestial creature that was out there. Yeah.
Enough said.
That was on me.
So let me see this. As an almost old man, right, and as a game developer, I would 10 times over rather see Steve and Matt and Guillermo Del Toro and Danny and me with glimmers in our eyes, even if we're being naive, right? Than see us with like dull, half-closed, checking our emails during the meetings, right?
Yeah.
I would much rather see that, right? Because it may be hard, but at least we're excited. There's some potential, right? And it was there. It was there for that one. There was a spark. There was the spark.
Yeah.
It was exciting. There was something really special there.
Oh, absolutely.
There was something special there, and it was. It's a shame that no one will ever see it.
And that's it. In a 2015 interview with IGN, Guillermo Del Toro talked about his time in the game industry and said, quote, "Well, I've tried twice and I don't know if I'll ever come back to the form. In one instance, the company went down, and in the second, the completely unexpected happened, which was Kojima and Konami separating. It's kind of left me reeling." While we can always look forward to Del Toro appearing in Death Stranding from Kojima, I think we all hope that at some point he gives another stab and tries making another game in the video game industry. Special thanks are in order for making this episode come together. I want to send a special thanks over to Mike Kulas from Revival Productions, who just released a new Descent-style game earlier this year called Overload, Sam Keenan for writing the original music, Matt, Steve, and Jacques for sharing their story, obviously Guillermo Del Toro for all of his hard work on Insane, and I want to send a special thanks to the rest of the former and current development staff at Volition for all of their hard work and great games throughout the years. If you like this episode of the Game Informer Show podcast, we'd always appreciate it if you help share it with a friend or subscribe to the audio version on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast from. We do have regular versions of the show every single Thursday with many more developer interviews. We also have exclusive information on all of Game Informer's cover stories, because we're a magazine after all, so it's a lot of fun stuff. Exclusive info, editors, and a roundtable. It's a great time. So if you've never given it a listen, check it out. Thanks so much for watching and listening, everybody.
Good one. That's nice to see you, Jacques.
Nice to see you. It's been a long time.
Man.